Some people heal with time. I needed soil, sunlight, and silence. Welcome back to Wives Gone Wild. Thanks for being here. Where are you joining us from? We love seeing where these wild tales land. Let's get started. I'm Marcus Shaw, and I thought I'd buried the past until it rolled back into my life on 4 oversized tires. Each morning, I'd stand on my front porch with a chipped ceramic mug warming my hands, the scent of black coffee mixing with fresh earth. My little patch of green wasn't much, just a square of lawn in a sleepy Illinois cul-de-sac, but it was mine. Roses and soft reds, tulips like upright flames, a few stubborn daisies dotting the edges. I'd built the fence myself, no nails left over, no pieces missing. It was the kind of order I couldn't find in my marriage. After Clarissa walked out with half my life in 2 overstuffed suitcases, I stayed. I stayed and built something that didn't shout or slam doors. The garden was quiet. Honest. I could pull weeds and know they'd stay gone if I was thorough. Life didn't work that way, but flowers did. For a while, it felt like peace. The kind that settles into your bones when no one's yelling, when your name isn't being thrown around like an insult. I had my mornings, my coffee, and the soft hum of sprinklers keeping me company. Then the moving truck came. 3 houses down. I watched from the porch, thinking nothing of it at first. People came and went all the time. Young families, retirees, folks looking to stretch out in their final chapters. I figured the new neighbors would be like the rest, quiet, respectful, far removed from whatever chaos had shaped them. But then the passenger door swung open, and I felt my stomach cave in on itself. Clarissa. She stepped out like a commercial break I didn't ask for, hair flipping just so, sunglasses oversized, strutting like the street belonged to her. That smug glide I remembered too well. The way she carried herself when she wanted people to notice. And I noticed. My jaw clenched before I could stop it. And then came Rick. I didn't know his name yet, just the silhouette, broad shoulders, buzzed haircut, boots hitting the driveway like war drums. He climbed down from the driver's seat of a chrome-plated beast of a truck, engine still rumbling like a dare. Oversized wheels. Extra lift. All ego. My fingers curled tighter around the coffee mug. I watched them unpack. Luggage, boxes, him barking orders while she floated around sipping something iced. Maybe it was lemonade. Maybe it was vodka. I couldn't tell from a distance, and I didn't care. I just hoped, foolishly, that they'd keep to themselves. That the universe had finally run out of ways to mess with me. But hope's a fragile thing. And that morning, as the sun warmed the petals I'd nurtured, I felt it crack like frostbitten glass. They hadn't even spoken to me yet. But the past had moved into my cul-de-sac, loud and grinning. And I knew, deep down, beneath the coffee and calm, I'd be hearing from them soon. Real soon. The first time it happened, I told myself it was an accident. The second time, I knew better. I'd just finished watering the roses, watching droplets catch the morning light like glass beads clinging to the petals. The air smelled like wet soil and spring bloom. Clean, calm, familiar. That calm shattered with the roar of an engine. Rick's truck fired up 3 doors down like it was trying to shake the street awake. I looked up, already bracing myself. He backed out hard. No pause, no check over the shoulder. Then he cut the wheel too sharp, and that oversized beast rolled across the corner of my yard. Right over the edge, tires sinking into the grass like it owed him something. I stood there, garden hose still running in my hand, the spray now missing the soil and hitting the sidewalk. My mouth was a tight line, jaw locked so hard I felt it in my temples. It wasn't the flower bed, not yet, but I felt it just the same. A warning, like the first crack in a windshield before the whole thing gives. The next weekend? Same routine. Coffee. Porch, engine, tires. This time, he clipped the fence, barely, but enough to rattle it. Left another dark path in the grass, carved deep from the weight of that truck. I walked out after he passed, touched the fresh rut with my boot. The soil was still warm. It felt like someone had put their foot on my chest and pressed down. I told myself it wasn't worth starting something. Maybe he misjudged the corner. Maybe it wasn't personal. But the maybe wore thin fast. Week after week, the same thing. A new gash in the lawn, a new stain of tread where green used to grow. And always the same setup. Rick behind the wheel, sunglasses on, windows down, music thumping like a taunt. Never a glance. Never an apology. I'd fix the damage in silence. Reseed the grass. Flatten the divots with the back of a rake. but it never healed right. Like a scar you keep splitting open. Clarissa? She'd be out there sometimes too, perched on their porch with a drink in her hand and that signature smirk. She didn't wave. She didn't look away either. Just watch me watching them. It hadn't reached the flowers yet, but it was coming. The truck's tires were getting closer. Rick's grin was getting bolder. And I had this sinking feeling that my garden, the one place I still felt whole, was next in line. Some people swing fists. Others set fires. But Rick? He started with my grass and made sure I saw every inch of it die. It happened on a Saturday, the kind of quiet morning that usually made me believe peace could be permanent. I was down on one knee, dirt packed under my nails, slipping new marigolds into the soil. Their orange petals reminded me of little bursts of fire, like defiant sparks in a world trying to stay gray. The sun was gentle that morning, filtered through the trees just right. I remember thinking maybe, just maybe, things would settle. Then I heard it. That low growl of Rick's truck, the kind of sound that prickles your skin before you even register it. I turned my head, slow, still hoping it wasn't what I thought. But it was. He didn't just clip the grass this time. He didn't even pretend to avoid it. He swung wide, too wide, and aimed straight for my garden. The tires hit the flower bed like a sledgehammer. The front wheels crushed the roses first, my oldest ones, the ones I'd nursed back to life after a frost that should have killed them. Then came the tulips, flattened into a muddy smear of red and yellow. The marigolds? Gone. Just stems and silence. I jumped to my feet, heart slamming against my ribs. Dirt clung to my jeans, my hands clenched without thinking. And Rick? He didn't even slow down. Windows down, radio blasting, his laugh spilled out behind him. Loud, careless, cruel. Like none of it meant anything. Like I was the joke. I turned, and there was Clarissa. On her porch, sipping from a glass, probably wine, maybe whiskey. Her lips curled into that same smirk she used during arguments, back when she knew she'd already won and was just waiting for me to figure it out. She didn't say a word, just watched me, like a queen observing a peasant's tantrum. I crossed the street without wiping the dirt off my knees. I wasn't thinking. I wasn't breathing. I just moved. Rick had already parked and was climbing out, wiping his hands on his jeans like he'd changed a tire or finished a hard day's work. Clarissa stayed seated, swirling her drink, bored and smug. "Hey," I called, voice tighter than I expected. Rick turned, slow, that grin already forming. "Something wrong, buddy? You mind keeping your truck off my property?" He raised both eyebrows, then looked over his shoulder like he wasn't sure what I was talking about. "It's just some flowers, man." I felt the heat rise in my chest. "It's my garden. I've spent years building it. You don't get to roll through it like it's a joke." He laughed, actually laughed, a short, barking sound that echoed off the garage doors and into my gut. Then he looked over at Clarissa, like I was entertainment. She set down her glass and tilted her head. "Oh, Marcus, lighten up. Men will be men. Rick's a real man, not like some people." That line, a real man. She'd used it in court. Used it to twist the knife back when she wanted to make sure I stayed small. I bit down so hard on the inside of my cheek, I tasted blood. Rick slapped the hood of his truck. "Maybe you should get a tougher hobby, flower boy. Grow something less delicate." I didn't answer. I just turned around and walked away. Their laughter followed me the whole way back, sour and sticky like smoke that clings to your clothes long after the fire's out. Behind me, my garden looked like a battlefield. And inside me, something cracked wide open. Not broken. Not yet. But close. You ever try to stay calm while someone spits on everything you've built? That's what it felt like, every Saturday, like clockwork. I'd wake up early, the same way I always did. Coffee in hand, porch quiet, the street still sleeping. I tried to pretend it was just another morning, that the ruin of my garden hadn't worked its way into my chest like a splinter I couldn't dig out. But the knot in my gut was always there, tight, waiting. And sure enough, like some twisted ritual, Rick's engine would growl to life around 9. That overcompensating beast of a truck, chrome flashing, pipes rattling. He'd swing out of their driveway and cut straight across my yard. Again, and again, and again. By then, he wasn't even pretending it was an accident. He aimed for it. Every pass was deliberate. The tires chewed deeper through the grass and into the beds I tried to restore. Pedals shredded. Fences leaning. Mud everywhere. I'd be standing there, trying to stay still, coffee mug trembling in my hand as he tore past like he owned the street. And Clarissa? Always on the porch. Same glass in hand. Same expression, somewhere between smug and amused, like I was her favorite rerun. She started waving at me when he did it. A slow, lazy wave, like she was daring me to break. I tried again to talk to them. God help me, I tried. One afternoon, Rick had just finished another joyride over my daisies. I walked over. No yelling. No threats. Just my hands shoved deep in my pockets to keep them from shaking. He was leaning against his truck, polishing the hood like it was a trophy. Clarissa sat nearby on the steps, ice clinking in her glass like applause after a punchline. Hey, I said, steady. I'm asking you again. Keep your truck off my property. Rick didn't even look up. Just kept wiping. It's just a little fun, man. Relax. Fun. That word snapped something in me. It's not fun for me, I said, voice tightening. That garden meant something. I've put years into it. You're wrecking it, for no reason. He straightened then, towering over me, that same wolfish grin stretching wide. It's just dirt and petals, Marcus. Maybe if you had something worth protecting, I'd care. And just when I thought it couldn't get worse, Clarissa chimed in. Sweet as poison. He's asserting his manhood, she said with a smirk. You wouldn't get it. Asserting his manhood. I nearly laughed, right there on the sidewalk, just to keep from screaming. But all I did was turn around and walk back across the street. Their laughter followed me, like smoke slipping under a locked door. I patched up what I could. Again, replanted, hammered loose slats back into the fence. But the rows weren't straight anymore. The flowers looked tired. And so did I. I started avoiding my front yard altogether. Not because I didn't care, but because I cared too much, and it hurt to look at it. I'd peek out the window like a prisoner, waiting for that sound. That engine. That truck. And when I heard it, I'd brace myself. Not because I feared Rick, but because I feared the version of myself I was starting to become. Quiet, worn down, cornered, and still not ready to fight back. Sometimes, the worst pain doesn't come with a warning. It comes with silence, then wreckage. It had been a long Friday night. I'd stayed up late, hammering the last nails into a new section of fence, the boards fresh and smooth beneath my palms. I planted another row of flowers, bright marigolds again, stubborn little survivors, and told myself things might finally turn. The yard looked good. Not perfect, but better. I remember standing there in the porch light, dirt on my jeans and sweat down my back, feeling proud. Just a flicker, but it was there. The next morning, I shuffled outside with a fresh mug of coffee, expecting to see the fruits of all that work still standing. I didn't make it past the porch. The garden was gone. Not bruised, not scuffed, destroyed. Every flower had been ripped from the ground or crushed flat. The roses were in pieces, the tulips shredded. The marigolds gone. Even the new fence had been kicked in, splinters scattered across the lawn like broken bones. Deep tire tracks ran right through the middle, carving a path of violence across what had once been color and order. The air still smelled like exhaust. I dropped the mug. It shattered on the steps, hot coffee soaking my boots, but I barely felt it. My hands were shaking, chest tight like I couldn't breathe. I didn't need to guess who did it. Rick's truck was still idling 2 houses down, engine rumbling low. And there he was, leaning out the window with that same damn grin, like a kid who just broke something valuable and couldn't wait to be caught. Oops, he called, then floored it. The tires screeched. Mud flew. He disappeared down the street, and behind him, on the porch, was Clarissa. She was doubled over with laughter. The kind of laughter that has nothing to do with humor and everything to do with cruelty. She almost spilled her drink. I didn't move for a long time. Just stood there, staring at the wreckage of everything I'd poured myself into. The last good piece of my life, flattened, ground into the dirt like it never mattered. But it mattered to me. Every morning I spent out there. Every minute I'd spent fixing what the world had broken. It wasn't just a hobby. It wasn't just petals and fences. It was healing. It was mine. And they'd taken it, because they could. I walked back inside, kicked the door shut, and collapsed into the nearest chair. My hands were still shaking, but my head was clear for the first time in weeks. I wasn't going to plead with them anymore. I wasn't going to yell, or beg, or stand there like a man waiting to be kicked again. They thought I was weak, that I'd roll over, that I'd let it slide. But not this time. I didn't know what the plan was yet. But as I sat there, boots still wet with spilled coffee and soil, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was no longer about flowers. It was about not letting them break me. And I was done playing nice. Vengeance doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it hums quietly while you sharpen the blade. I didn't sleep that night, not really. I'd close my eyes and see crushed stems and torn roots. Every time I blinked, I was back in that garden, watching the destruction unfold in slow motion. But under all the exhaustion and anger, something new had started to take root. Resolve. By the time the sun crept over the rooftops, painting the street in soft gold, I was already scrolling through my contacts, looking for one name. One person I knew would understand the kind of problem I had, and the kind of solution I needed. Kel Benton. Kel was an old friend from the days before Clarissa, back when my life was simple and my weekends were filled with football games, cheap beer, and half-finished projects. He lived out in the country now, a farmer with a talent for tinkering. One of those guys who could build a scarecrow that cussed in 3 languages or a raccoon trap that played Mozart. More importantly, Kel owed me a favor. I helped him haul hay 3 summers ago when his truck died during harvest. He'd said, "Anything you need, Marcus, no expiration date." So I cashed it in. I paced the kitchen as the phone rang, my eyes drifting toward the window. My yard was still a crime scene. The fence splintered, the soil scarred, and that stupid truck of Rick's was parked right where he could see every bit of damage he caused. "Marcus Shaw, you old dog," Kel answered, voice gravelly and bright like he'd just stepped out of a western. I didn't waste time. "Kel, I need your help. My ex-wife's new husband has been tearing up my garden for weeks. I'm done letting it slide." Kel was quiet for a second, then let out a low chuckle. "Sounds like someone finally pushed you too far. What did you have in mind?" "I want to stop him. No fights, no yelling. Something clever. Something he won't see coming." "Oh, I like that," Kel said. "Real cold justice. All right, listen close." He started rattling off ideas, each one more absurd and perfect than the last. A perimeter mat, low voltage, just enough to jolt, not harm. Farmers use them to keep cattle in line. Motion-triggered sprinklers, ice-cold blasts aimed right where Rick always cut across. And the crown jewel? A motion-activated speaker rigged to unleash a deep, guttural roar, part demon, part hellhound. "I tuned it myself," Kel said, clearly proud. "Sounds like Satan getting out of bed. It'll scare the soul out of him." I could feel my grin spreading. "How fast can you get it to me? Give me a day? I'll drop it off myself. You owe me a 6-pack after this one." "Done." The call ended, and I stood there for a moment, still staring out the window. But this time, it wasn't with dread. It was with anticipation. Rick had turned my garden into a battlefield. Now it was my turn to set the trap. And I wasn't just planting flowers anymore. I was planting a reckoning. Revenge, when it's quiet and patient, tastes better than you expect. Kel showed up just after lunch the next day, his beat-up pickup coughing into my driveway like a beast with a cold. He jumped out, sunburned and grinning, hauling a dented toolbox and a cardboard box that rattled like mischief. He dropped them onto my porch with a satisfying thud. "Here's your revenge kit," he said, smirking like a kid delivering fireworks on the 4th of July. Inside the box, one perimeter mat, thin, wired, and coated in a soft rubber. A battery pack, 2 motion-triggered sprinklers. A speaker small enough to hide, but powerful enough to wake the dead. Kel held up his phone and played the sound. It started low, like a growl, then exploded into a roar, somewhere between a demon's howl and a dying engine. It shook the porch window. I nearly dropped my coffee. "Beautiful, right?" Kel said, eyes gleaming. "He'll think the devil came for him personally." We got to work while the sun was still high, laying shallow trenches along the yard's edge. I buried the mat under fresh dirt, smoothing it with my boot. The sprinklers were tucked in behind what little was left of the flowers, aimed like sentries guarding the fence. We mounted the speaker under the porch, angled out toward the street. Finally, I dug out the old security cameras from the garage, cheap but reliable. One went above the front door, another by the garage, both aimed squarely at the kill zone. Kel wired it all together, splicing wires like he was defusing a bomb. "Step on the mat," he said, and boom. The whole circus kicks off. By the time we finished, the sun was slipping behind the rooftops, and the yard looked normal again, innocent, untouched. But I knew better. It wasn't a garden anymore. It was a trap. Kel cracked open a beer from my fridge, clinked it against my coffee mug, and said, "You're a patient man, Marcus. But even patient men need a win." After he left, I sat by the window, lights off, phone in hand. The camera feeds flickered to life, silent green dots blinking in the dark. I watched the street like a hawk, coffee cooling beside me, body tense and ready. Rick was a creature of habit. Weekends were his time to puff his chest and leave his mark. I knew he'd show. He couldn't help himself. And just after 2 a.m., I saw it. Headlights creeping down the cul-de-sac, low and deliberate. The truck was moving slower than usual, like he was trying to savor the moment. I leaned forward, heart pounding. He didn't brake. He didn't turn. He drove straight for my yard. Front wheels hit the mat. Zap! A sharp, clean crack, like static snapping in a quiet room. The truck jolted. I heard a high-pitched yelp from inside, one that didn't match Rick's usual gruff bark. Then the sprinklers kicked in, full blast, cold as winter, straight through the open windows. He cursed, loud, panicked, scrambling, and then came the roar. That unholy demon scream erupted from the porch, shaking the air itself. Rick's truck fishtailed, back tires spinning, mud spraying in wild arcs. His yelling turned frantic, and that's when Clarissa stumbled out onto their porch, barefoot, wrapped in her signature robe, hair a mess. She stepped off the stoop and hit the mat herself. Zap! She shrieked, high and wild, staggering back like she'd been struck by lightning. The sprinklers nailed her too, soaking her robe, plastering her hair to her face. I couldn't stay inside. I grabbed my jacket, slipped on my boots, and walked out slow, calm, like I was just checking the weather. Rick was half out of the truck, soaked and slipping in the mud. Clarissa was dripping on the sidewalk, hands clenched, teeth bared. The roar had faded, but the sprinklers were still hissing. I leaned against the railing, arms crossed. Problems? I asked, voice flat. Rick spun toward me, red-faced, fists clenched. Clarissa marched up, dripping and furious, pointing a trembling finger in my face. What did you do, Marcus? This is insane. We're calling the police. I didn't blink. Please do, I said. I've got footage of you two destroying my yard for weeks. The cops might like to see it. She stopped cold. Her mouth opened, then shut. Rick looked like he wanted to swing, but even he wasn't dumb enough to do it with cameras blinking at him. You think you're clever? He growled. This your idea of being a man? I shrugged. I think it's smarter than driving a truck over a flower bed. Clarissa hissed. This isn't over. Maybe it wasn't. But in that moment, with mud on Rick's boots, water dripping from Clarissa's eyelashes, and my trap reset for the next fool who tried me, it sure felt like I was the one holding the leash. The next morning, I woke up lighter than I'd felt in weeks, like I'd finally exhaled after holding my breath too long. I poured my coffee, stepped onto the porch, and took it all in. The lawn was still muddy. Tire tracks carved jagged lines through the flower beds. But the memory of Rick flailing in the spray and Clarissa shrieking like a soaked cat, that alone made it worth every ruined petal. Their house was unusually quiet. Rick's truck sat crooked in the driveway, streaked with dried mud. Through their front window, I caught a glimpse of him pacing like a caged animal. Clarissa wasn't on the porch. I figured she was still stewing in that soggy robe. I expected the cops to show up any minute after all their big talk. But the street stayed still. Until noon, a sleek black sedan rolled to a stop in front of my house. Clean. Cold. The kind of car that makes you instinctively check your name isn't being served on a platter. A guy in a stiff gray suit stepped out with a clipboard in hand and zero patience in his eyes. You Marcus Shaw? That's me. He handed me a folded packet thick with legalese. Cease and desist, he said flatly. Filed by Richard Dalton. Claims you're harassing him with dangerous devices. You've got 24 hours to remove them or he'll press charges. I scanned the document. Words like liability, property endangerment, and intentional provocation all standing in bold like accusations. At the bottom, Rick's signature, big, loud, sloppy. I almost laughed. I thanked the guy and shut the door behind him. My good mood briefly soured. Dangerous devices? Harassment? This, from the man who'd been treating my yard like a demolition derby since the day he moved in? I tossed the packet on the table and grabbed my phone. Pulled up the security footage from last night. There it was, Rick trespassing, getting zapped, soaked, scared out of his mind. Clarissa stumbling into the trap behind him. My porch, my yard, my land. All of it captured crystal clear. If anyone was in the wrong here, it wasn't me. Still, something shifted. The victory I'd felt? Fading. Because even after catching them red-handed, Even after watching them squirm, they weren't backing off. They were regrouping, and they were getting petty. It started small. Later that evening, I spotted a pair of ketchup packets stuck to one of my garden gnomes, sloppily torn open, red goo dripping down its hat like blood in a cheap horror flick. I figured maybe some kid with a twisted sense of humor had wandered through. The next morning, there were beer cans. 3 of them, crushed and jammed into what was left of my flower beds, stinking of stale alcohol and spite. I stared at them for a long time. This wasn't random. The day after that, garbage. Scattered across the yard, banana peels, crumpled napkins, fast food wrappers. And the kicker came the next morning. Cat litter. A heaping, sour pile of used cat litter dumped right by my porch steps. The stench hit me before I even opened the door. I nearly gagged. I grabbed a shovel and a trash bag, cleaned it up with clenched teeth and curses under my breath. Then I checked the cameras. Nothing clear. Just shadows. Movement near the edges. Whoever it was knew the blind spots. And that made my stomach twist. Rick had been watching, learning, dodging. Every time I stepped outside, I could feel him watching. Clarissa, too, occasionally perched on her porch again, drink in hand, cold eyes fixed on my door like she was waiting for me to snap. But I didn't snap. I watched. I waited. And I made a silent promise to myself. If they wanted to play dirty, I'd let them. Because next time, I'd be ready with more than a garden hose and motion sensors. You ever watch someone destroy something slowly, piece by piece, while pretending they're not doing a thing? That's what it felt like. I was becoming a prisoner in my own house. Always one step behind. Always cleaning up after another little message from Rick and Clarissa. The trash. The litter. The cans. Each mess was small, but the intent behind it? That was loud. But nothing prepared me for what came next. It was late, just after midnight. I was sitting in the dark, same chair by the window, coffee gone cold beside me. My eyes were heavy, but I stayed sharp, watching the cameras on my phone. Street quiet. Porch lights off. Wind barely rustling the trees. Then I saw it. A figure crept into frame, just on the edge of the garage cam. Low, deliberate. Not a car. Not a shadow. A person. My breath caught. He moved with purpose, hunched, holding something over his shoulder. A bag. Looked heavy. I leaned closer to the screen. Rick. I knew that shape. That wide frame. The way he moved like he owned everything he walked across. He stopped near the garden, what was left of it, and knelt. Opened the sack. Then he started pouring. It wasn't garbage. It wasn't dirt. It was white. Granular. Coarse. Salt. My stomach turned. A whole bag of it. Dumped right into the soil, thick and heavy, like a curse whispered straight into the roots. He was poisoning the ground. Not just ruining what was there, but making damn sure nothing would grow again. I didn't move. Didn't blink. Just watched him finish his work, dust off his hands like a job well done, and slink back into the shadows like a coward with a badge of pride. But this time, he wasn't as careful as he thought. The garage cam caught him full on. Face lit by a sliver of streetlight. His smirk. His hoodie. The sack still clutched in his fist. Crystal clear. I saved the footage to 3 different files. Uploaded it to the cloud. Backed it up on a flash drive. Then I picked up the phone and called the police. No more games. No more traps. This was destruction, calculated, deliberate. The dispatcher picked up on the 3rd ring. I gave her my name, my street, told her exactly what happened. I've got video. He salted the earth. It's all there. They arrived in 20 minutes. A cruiser rolled in quiet, headlights dimmed. 2 officers, one older, one young, stepped out and met me at the door. I didn't waste a word. Pulled up the footage, showed them everything. The older one raised an eyebrow. That's pretty blatant, she muttered, already scribbling. You know who he is? Rick Dalton, I said. 3 houses down. And this isn't the first time he's gone after me. She nodded, lips pressed in a tight line. Let's go have a conversation with Mr. Dalton. I stood on the porch and watched them walk down the street, flashlights cutting through the dark. Their voices were low, firm. Then the front door opened, and Rick stepped out. Shirtless, barefoot, looking annoyed, until he saw the badges. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw it, the instant shift. His arms went wide, voice rising. Clarissa appeared behind him, frantic, throwing questions and excuses like confetti. But the officers weren't buying it. The young cop said something. Rick sagged. Then came the cuffs. Click. Tight. Final. I stood frozen, watching him get walked to the car like the overgrown bully he was. Clarissa yelling behind him like her voice could undo what he'd done. It couldn't. The older officer returned. "We're charging him with trespassing and property damage," she said. "You still want to press charges?" I looked past her, toward the scorched patch of garden, now salted and dead under the moonlight. Absolutely. Rick had salted the earth thinking he'd stop something from growing. What he didn't know? He'd just planted the seed for his own downfall. There's a quiet that comes after justice lands, sharp, cold, and almost too clean to feel real. The morning after Rick's arrest, I stepped out onto my porch and braced for the usual mud, trash, laughter that never reached the eyes. But the street was still. His truck sat abandoned in the driveway, crooked like a drunk had parked it. No music. No Clarissa sipping smugness from her glass. Just silence. I didn't trust it. A few neighbors peeked out from behind curtains. Others came right out into the open. For the first time since this all started, someone actually waved at me. A real wave. The kind that says, "Hey, I saw what happened. And I'm glad." But I wasn't celebrating. Not yet. I knew better than to assume the storm was over just because the sky cleared. Rick was out on bail by evening. Clarissa posted some passive-aggressive rant online about false accusations and petty men with garden obsessions, but I ignored it. I had something better than internet drama. I had evidence, police reports, and a date with a county judge. Still, the tension wasn't gone. If anything, it got meaner. That first night after Rick got out, I noticed something odd. One of my trash bins was missing. Just gone. I figured maybe the wind or a raccoon dragged it off. But the next morning, I found it. Burnt. Someone had dragged it into the alley behind my fence and lit it on fire. The plastic warped and collapsed inward, half melted and reeking of ash. A bitter, chemical stink that clung to the air for hours. I reported it. Another line in the growing police file. But that wasn't what got me. What got me was how fast Clarissa pivoted. She stopped pretending. The next day, I caught her in my front yard. She wasn't sneaking. She was standing there, bold as anything, staring at the patch of salted soil like she was admiring her legacy. I opened the door. "You need something?" She didn't flinch. "Just wondering what kind of flowers can grow in dirt that's been cursed." I stepped down onto the porch. "You'd be surprised what can survive in spite of you." She smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. "Careful, Marcus. People like you think the law's on your side, until it isn't. And people like you think they're untouchable, until they're not." Her smirk cracked, just for a second, before she turned and walked away, her heels crunching over gravel like they were daring me to follow. I didn't. I didn't need to. Because later that night, the drone footage came through. One of my neighbors, Kel, bless him, had mounted a drone cam across from his barn that swept the cul-de-sac every couple hours. "Just a hobby," he said. But that footage? Gold. There she was. Clarissa. Late at night. Hood up, face visible in a clean still shot as she dragged my trash bin down the alley, flicking a lighter, tossing something inside. It wasn't pixelated. It wasn't vague. It was her. Clear as day. I saved it. Labeled it. Sent it straight to the officer handling my case. The reply was simple. "Got it. She's next." The garden might have been dead. The flowers, gone. The soil, poisoned. But every time they tried to bury me, they forgot something important. I kept receipts. Some people self-destruct quietly. Clarissa? She preferred fireworks. It had only been a day since I'd turned in the drone footage, and the silence on their end was eerie. No revving engines, no late-night trash raids, no smug porch theatrics. It was like they were holding their breath. I knew better than to believe it meant peace. That evening, I was reading on the couch, a breeze drifting through the open window, when I caught it, an acrid, biting scent. Not smoke from a barbecue, not wood burning. Plastic. I bolted to the front door, heart pounding, and saw it. Flames. A full blaze licking up from the small trash bin next to my house, fire crackling and spitting embers onto the siding. The heat slapped me in the face. I grabbed the garden hose and turned it on full blast, aiming straight at the flames. Water hissed against the fire. Smoke billowed into the air like some twisted distress signal. My heart hammered as I soaked the area until the last ember hissed into silence. The plastic had collapsed in on itself, blackened and warped, the air thick with melted chemicals and burnt paper. Whoever did it had waited for the right night. No wind, no rain, just dry darkness and opportunity. And I knew exactly who that someone was. Clarissa hadn't just crossed a line. She'd poured gasoline on it and struck the match. I pulled the security footage again, just in case. But I didn't need it this time. Kel's drone had been running another lap. And once again, it saw everything. There she was. Clarissa, hood off this time, hair tied back, walking with purpose. Her face tilted upward just enough to catch the glow from a street lamp. She carried the canister like it weighed nothing, set it down, lit it, and walked away without so much as a glance. I sent the video to the same officer as before. No message this time. The clip said enough. 2 patrol cars pulled up just after midnight. No lights, no sirens, just quiet authority. I didn't even need to watch this time, but I did. Clarissa opened the door like she'd been expecting them. No protest, no screaming. She stepped outside with her arms already crossed, face flat, robe cinched too tightly around her waist like she was trying to hold herself together. The officer said something. She nodded, and then they cuffed her. Click. She didn't yell. She didn't cry, just stiffened as they walked her toward the car. But just before she ducked her head to climb in, she looked back. Right at me. No fury, no sarcasm, just a flat, quiet kind of hate, the kind that burns long after the fire's out. The car pulled away. I stood on my porch, the hose still dripping in one hand, the air around me still warm from the blaze. The house smelled like smoke and melted plastic, but beneath it all, relief. Clarissa thought she was untouchable, that her chaos would never catch up with her. But fire leaves a trail, and this time, it led straight to her door. You can burn bridges, poison soil, even shatter windows, but some damage cuts deeper. And it doesn't always show up until someone finally speaks. It had been quiet for days. Clarissa was gone, booked and held for arson. Rick hadn't been seen much since. His truck hadn't moved. His porch light stayed off, and the usual bluster that seemed to define him had vanished into silence. Then, one afternoon, I heard the knock. Not on my door, his. I looked up from my porch to see a kid standing there. Late teens, maybe 20. Tall, lean, brown hair tucked under a baseball cap, backpack slung over one shoulder. There was something familiar in his posture, in the way he stood with his hands buried in his jacket pockets like he didn't know whether to knock again or turn around and disappear. I didn't need anyone to tell me who he was. Aiden, Rick's son from a previous marriage. I'd heard about him in passing, mostly from Clarissa's snide complaints. Aiden's soft. She once said loud enough for me to hear. Too quiet, like his mom. Apparently, quiet was her code for thoughtful. Because this kid? He looked like he'd already seen too much. The door opened. Rick stepped out, face hard, eyes sunken. No shirt, just sweatpants and a look like sleep had been dodging him for days. He said something too quiet for me to hear. Aiden didn't flinch. He just handed over a piece of paper, maybe a letter, maybe nothing. Rick took it, glanced at it, and crumpled it without reading. Then came the yelling. I couldn't make out the first few words, but the tone was sharp, cutting, defensive. Rick's voice rose fast, accusing, loud enough to carry across the yards. He jabbed a finger toward me at one point, but Aiden didn't turn. He just stood there, calm, arms folded, letting Rick spit whatever venom he needed to get out. Then, when it was quiet enough, Aiden finally spoke. And this time, I heard every word. You used to be strong, he said. Now you're just mean. There's a difference. Rick started to say something, but Aiden cut him off. You let a woman turn you into a bully. You torched someone's peace just because you couldn't build your own. I don't want to be anything like you. That was the moment. Rick didn't yell again. He just stood there, mouth open, fists clenched, but no words left. Aiden nodded once, turned, and walked down the driveway. He passed me on the way out, offered a brief nod, respectful, like we both understood something that didn't need explaining. I didn't say anything either. Some victories don't need applause. Rick watched his son disappear down the street. He stood in the doorway for a long time afterward, shoulders sagging like someone had finally seen through him. And it broke something permanent. He hadn't just lost control. He'd lost the one person who still believed he could change. And this time, there was no garden to trample, no fire to light, no enemy left to blame. Sometimes, endings don't arrive with thunder. They slip in quietly, like a door left ajar after the shouting fades. After Aiden left, the street fell into a kind of hush I hadn't felt since before Rick and Clarissa showed up. It wasn't just the absence of noise, it was the absence of tension. The kind of stillness that tells you something's over, even if no one says it out loud. For the first time in weeks, Rick's truck didn't move. It sat idle in the driveway like a forgotten relic. The engine didn't rumble. The music didn't blare. No muddy arcs in my grass. Just silence. Then, one morning, I stepped onto my porch and saw a moving truck parked in front of their house. No ceremony. No noise. Just two guys in matching shirts quietly carrying boxes out the front door. Rick didn't help. He stood off to the side, arms crossed, face carved from stone. No Clarissa. Not a single glimpse of her. Whether she was still locked up or just done playing house with him, I didn't know. Didn't care. The boxes kept coming. Hastily packed, some spilling open at the edges. One of them fell on the driveway. The flap tore, and a stack of framed photos slid out across the concrete. I watched from a distance. Rick didn't pick them up. He just stared down at them for a long moment, then turned away. By noon, the truck was full. One of the movers closed the back door with a heavy thunk, nodded to Rick, and climbed in. A puff of exhaust, and a quiet goodbye to the worst chapter this street had ever seen. Rick didn't say goodbye to anyone. Not that there was anyone left to say it to. He got into his truck, finally, and drove off slowly. No engine revving, no angry music. Just a quiet exit down the road, tail lights blinking like punctuation. And just like that, they were gone. The cul-de-sac exhaled. Neighbors who'd stayed hidden behind blinds started stepping outside again. Old Mrs. Leonard across the street brought out her sun hat and watering can. The Patel kids rode their bikes without detouring around my yard. Kel even dropped by with a six-pack and a half-smile. "Didn't think I'd see this place calm again," he said, cracking one open. "Kinda eerie, huh?" I nodded. "A good kind of eerie." He lifted his can toward the garden. "Or what was left of it. You thinking about starting over?" I looked out over the scorched dirt, the salted patch still barren, the fence still tilted slightly at one end. "Yeah," I said. "But not right away. Not because I didn't want to, but because some things need time. Time to breathe. Time to settle. Time to heal." For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I had to defend myself just for existing. No more watching the street like a war zone. No more swallowing my anger to keep the peace. Just silence. And maybe, just maybe, the start of something new waiting to bloom beneath it. Healing doesn't always start with a grand gesture. Sometimes, it begins with a knock at the door and a flower in someone's hand. It had been a few weeks since Rick and Clarissa vanished from the neighborhood. The air felt different, lighter, cleaner. I started sitting out on the porch again, coffee in hand, not to guard the yard, but to simply enjoy the breeze without waiting for a truck to roar by. That morning, the knock was soft, hesitant. I opened the door and found Aiden standing there. Same ball cap, same quiet eyes. But this time, something was different. He was holding a pot. Small. Clay. Inside it, a single marigold stood tall, its orange petals full, defiantly alive. "I saw the video," he said. "Everything they did. I wanted to say I'm sorry. I didn't say anything right away. My throat tightened, and I had to clear it just to speak." "You didn't do any of it," I said. "I know," he replied. "But I also know what it's like to carry the weight of someone else's damage." He looked down at the marigold, then back up. "My mom used to grow these. Said they were stubborn little things. Said they always come back, no matter how bad the soil." I took the pot from his hands and felt a lump in my throat that I didn't try to swallow this time. "Thank you," I said. Aiden nodded once, then stepped back. "You ever need help rebuilding? I'm around." And just like that, he turned and walked down the steps, hands in his pockets, fading into the morning like he belonged to it. I stood there for a while, staring at the flower. It wasn't just a gesture. It was a beginning. A promise that the ground might not be dead forever. That something beautiful might still find its way through the damage. I placed the pot on the porch railing. The marigold swayed gently in the breeze, as if testing the wind for trouble. But there was none. For the first time in months, peace didn't feel like a fluke. It felt like a choice. And maybe, just maybe, the soil hadn't given up on me after all. Growth doesn't happen all at once. Sometimes it's slow, quiet, the kind you don't notice until you realize you're no longer bracing for the next storm. Weeks passed. The days got warmer. The sting of everything that happened didn't disappear, but it softened. No more tire tracks. No more salt. No more war across the fence line. Just sunlight, silence, and the steady rhythm of morning coffee on the porch. I started with one corner of the yard. The marigold Aiden gave me sat proud in its clay pot. guarding the edge of the soil like a watchful eye. I took a shovel to the salted patch, turning over what I could, digging deep to let it breathe. I didn't expect miracles, but I owed the ground the chance. Little by little, I replanted. Nothing fancy, nothing fragile. Hardy things, lavender, thyme, black-eyed Susans. Plants that knew how to survive neglect, salt, and storms. Flowers with fight in them. Neighbors began to stop and chat. Real conversations, not just polite nods. Kel brought over compost and cracked a joke about me needing a scarecrow shaped like Clarissa to keep pests away. Even Mrs. Leonard handed me a bag of daffodil bulbs with a wink. "You've earned a bit of brightness," she said. And she wasn't wrong. It didn't feel like revenge anymore. Not even like a comeback. It felt like reclamation. This yard, this house, was mine again. Not because I defended it. Not because I trapped someone or pressed charges. But because I kept showing up. I rebuilt with hands that had once trembled in frustration and now worked with purpose. One morning, as I stepped outside, I noticed something new. A sprout. Tiny. Green. Pushing up through the salted soil I'd nearly given up on. It shouldn't have survived. Not there. Not after everything. But there it was. A reminder that some roots run deeper than hate. And some things will bloom again, even when the world tries to bury them. What about you? What's something you've rebuilt, even after it was burned to the ground? Drop your wild story below, and don't forget to subscribe for more tales of chaos, courage, and unexpected comebacks, right here on Wives Gone Wild.